Hey Life Groups, so glad that you are here. I want to introduce you to a man who is considered to be one of the finest mayors in our nation's history. Fiorello LaGuardia was the mayor of New York City during the worst days of the Great Depression and all of World War II. He was often referred to by adoring New Yorkers as the Little Flower because he was only 5'4" and always wore a carnation on his lapel. He was a colorful character who used to ride the New York City fire trucks, raid speakeasies with the police department, take entire orphanages to baseball games, and whenever the New York newspapers were on strike, he would go on the radio and read the Sunday funnies to the kids. You may have recognized his last name, LaGuardia, because one of New York City's 3 airports is named after him. The story is told that on one bitterly cold night in January of 1935, the mayor turned up at a night court that served the poorest ward of the city. LaGuardia dismissed the judge for the evening and took over the bench himself. Within a few minutes, a tattered old woman was brought before him, charged with stealing a loaf of bread. She told LaGuardia that her daughter's husband had deserted her and her daughter was sick, and her 2 grandchildren were starving. But the shopkeeper, from whom the bread was stolen, refused to drop the charges. "It's a real bad neighborhood, Your Honor," the man told the mayor. "She's got to be punished to teach other people around here a lesson." LaGuardia sighed. He turned to the woman and said, "I've got to punish you. The law makes no exceptions. $10 or 10 days in jail." But even as he pronounced the sentence, the mayor was already reaching into his pocket. He extracted a bill and tossed it into his famous sombrero, saying, "Here is the $10 fine, which I now remit. And furthermore, I'm going to fine everyone in this courtroom 50 cents for living in a town where a person has to steal bread so that her grandchildren can eat. Mr. Bailiff, collect the fines and give them to the defendant." So the following day, the New York City newspapers reported that $47.50 was turned over to a bewildered old lady who had stolen a loaf of bread to feed her starving grandchildren. 50 cents of that amount came contributed by the red-faced, angry grocery store owner, while some 70 petty criminals, people with traffic violations, and New York City policemen, each of whom had just paid 50 cents for the privilege of doing so, gave the mayor a standing ovation. Now, I want you to think about that for just a second. I want you to think about what this man did. Fiorello represented the authority of the law itself. He was sitting in the position of judge over this woman who had violated the law of the land. You can't steal. That's the law. Fiorello LaGuardia also pronounced the judgment upon this lady. The fine or debt had to be paid. If not, the prison sentence had to be carried out. Then, in a shocking turn of events, the Little Flower pays the debt himself, the debt that is owed by this guilty lady. In a very practical sense, what Fiorello LaGuardia did in that courtroom, whether he knew it or not, was a great picture of what Christ has done for us. The law, or maybe better put, the standard by which God judges mankind, is something that we can never fulfill on our own. We are like the old lady who violated the law, and let's call it what it is, sin. We have sinned. We have all fallen short of the glory of God, according to Romans 3:23. The law doesn't discriminate. We are guilty of sin. The law pronounces us guilty, and sin's penalty is death. The Bible is clear. Death is what we deserve. It's the penalty of our guilt, and there is no way that we can pay our sin debt off by ourselves. For the wages of sin is death, is what Romans 6:23 says. But then the shocking turn of events that happens for us is that Jesus, who is God and is the source of the law, he steps out of heaven and he dies on the cross. He dies in our place. He experiences exactly what we deserve, and because he was perfect in every way, he pays our sin debt completely. God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's Romans 5:8. Christ talks about this in his Sermon on the Mount. In Matthew 5, chapter 5, verse 17 through 20, he says this: "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have come not to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law, until it is all accomplished. Therefore, whoever relaxes one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Remember that it's Jesus speaking to these people, and the cross hasn't even happened yet. The price had not been paid for their sins. So in essence, he's preparing them for what is to come. He's making it very clear that our human efforts to live up to that standard that God has placed before us can really never be met. The people revered the scribes and the Pharisees. These were extremely disciplined religious men who devoted their entire lives to following every letter of the law. Yet they came up short. Man just can't be perfect. And even though they may have followed the letter of the law as close as humanly possible, they were missing the point, the more important spirit of the law. The spirit of the law is different in that it doesn't just follow the rules, it follows the spirit of intent that is behind those rules. This morning in church, I talked about the subject of lust as an over-desire. The letter of the law says, do not commit the act of adultery. The spirit of the law says, don't even think about or let your mind wander into those places where you are playing adulterous acts out in your mind, because that is just as much as adultery as the actual act of it is. 2 Corinthians 3:6, he has enabled us to be ministers of his new covenant. This is a covenant not of written laws, but of the Spirit. The old written covenant ends in death, but under the new covenant, the Spirit gives life. Now it's interesting how human nature is. We always drift back to self-effort for some reason, which is to say that we try to be good enough within ourselves. Religion always goes back to being good enough. In fact, all religions of the world have this one thing in common. From Buddhism to Islam, from pantheism to Hinduism, you name the religion and I will show you how they all hinge on what you have to do for God. There is one exception to this rule, however, it's Christianity. This is the only religion that completely hinges on what God has done for us. I do believe this self-effort human tendency, though, it does leak into our own beliefs as Christians. We fall into this idea that we must somehow perform for God, that we must live perfectly in order to be in His favor. The truth is this, we will never be perfect. But when we understand how much He has done for us in paying our sin debt, our lives will begin to reflect His perfection, and living out His standard becomes the fruit of our life. Romans 8:3 says this, for what the law was powerless to do, because it was weakened by the flesh, God did by sending His own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh to be a sin offering. And so He condemned sin in the flesh. You see, love was the missing ingredient to the law. The law in and of itself was powerless to free us from sin's control, but God loved us so much that He sent His one and only Son. And then Jesus loved us so much that He willingly died for us. And remember what Jesus said, He didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. I believe that within most people, there seems to be an inner desire to be good and to do what is right, even though that which is right and wrong can be very skewed within the heart and mind sometimes. There are people who don't necessarily even believe in God, who still have these desires to be good people. And generally speaking, this is because we were all created in His image, and the Word of God says that He has placed eternity in the hearts of men. Whether we like it or not, we are made in His likeness. God's fingerprints are all over us. We look like our Father, especially when it comes to that part of us way deep down inside that longs for the eternal being that is our Creator. We desire good in our innermost being. Yet our human efforts to achieve this goodness are futile. We can't reach the standard. We can't live up to the law. So again, look what Jesus has done. He hasn't abolished the law. He has given us a path to achieve righteousness apart from the law. with a personal decision to accept all that Jesus has done for you and to enter into that love relationship that he so desires to have with you, that's when those inner desires to be good are actually achievable. Because of love, you desire to live in a way that is pleasing to him. And even when we fall short in doing that, and we will, his righteousness has become our righteousness through that relationship. God's standard hasn't changed. Jesus has just completely fulfilled the law by making it possible for us to walk in his righteousness. And guys, I know it's a lot to take in, but the truth of this can literally change your life. It's amazing how real Jesus becomes when you are not just simply trying to please him with your deeds. We don't just become righteous through our own good deeds from the outside in. He makes us righteous from the inside out.